Buenos días y welcome, bienvenidos to another series of the Latina Leadership, El Poder de la Mujer, the Power of Women. I hope you're enjoying Hispanic Heritage Month because we have a real treat for you today. Today, we're going to be talking with Joelle Martinez. And she's kind of an icon in the leadership field. But before she stepped into that, she had 15 years of working in corporations, in public affairs. She's done nonprofit work. So she has a whole lot of experience to share with us. And today, she heads up the Latino Leadership Institute in Denver, but it's doing work all over. So I'm so excited to talk to her. And a special treat is that her family has been in the Southwest. How many generations, Joelle?
Well, I'm ninth generation at least.
Ninth generation. Now listen up. If you're an immigrant or you're from part of the United States where we haven't had that kind of history, there are Latinos in the U.S. who have been here way before this was a country. And Joelle, tell us a little bit about your family and how they got here and what they did, because I think they were ranchers and farmers. And go ahead.
Yeah.
When did this story begin?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you, Juana. And, it's just a treat to get to share this space with you and be in your orbit. I'm quite honored. But like many Latinos in the Southwest, our story is rooted in multiple generations of working the land. I say that I'm at least ninth generation because on my maternal side, they had indigenous roots that probably went back even further, as we really acknowledge that. And like many Latino stories in the Southwest, we represent the mestizo, which means that we are a mix of so many indigenous roots from the native tribes that were on this land long before folks began to come over, all the way to the Spanish side of my family. And so being part of that European movement that came through the Southwest and settled in southern and Colorado and northern New Mexico. So indigenous roots,
date?
Spanish roots.
Think back. What?
1500s is
1500s.
When, so late 1500s is the earliest. We actually did some genealogy work and some work in that. And, it's funny, because they tell you stories and you hear these stories that get passed down. But now with DNA testing and some of the genealogy work, you can actually verify that these stories were at least 85% true. But yeah, 1500s, again, that indigenous side of the family could have been around even longer. But like what happened to many in the Southwest is that those indigenous communities began to integrate and mix with the Spanish communities that were settling here. But I also have, Mexican roots on my mother's side. My great grandmother actually came over to the United States on her own as a teenager in order to work. She came over on her own and, was a staple in the community and, worked like so many, cleaning houses and manual labor and anything to make ends meet, but made a life for herself. I mean, truly, if you were to meet my grandmother, Mary, she was just a fighter. That's the only way I could describe her.
Well, we call them Adelitas too in the Mexican tradition because the women actually fought in the revolution, the Mexican Revolution, and they called them Adelitas.
Yes.
How do you think, because so many of us, like I'm an immigrant and 33% of our community are immigrants. How do you think that the idea that you have these kind of roots, how does it impact you? What do you think? Does it give you a sense of purpose, a sense of continuity? What would you say are some of those gifts?
Well, I think you used the right word, roots. When it comes to when people talk about American culture or, our history, I think it is, and my family, I give them a lot of credit because they made sure we knew about our roots. They made sure that we found pride in the fact that we were potato farmers in southern Colorado and Alamosa and Del Norte and these places. My great grandmother used to love reminding me that Del Norte was actually it was the runner up to be the capital of Colorado and fell short only by a couple of votes to Denver. So how would our community look differently if that had been determined as our capital? But I think storytelling, keeping that pride for who we are alive was something that I benefited from. Not everyone gets that, but also, you talk about this. I think being ninth generation also, sometimes I've had to really advocate for myself as a Latino. When my family moved from Southern Colorado to the Denver metro area, they were faced with racism and discrimination and signs that said no Mexicans allowed. And my family made a really tough decision multiple generations ago, that they were going to assimilate and that they weren't going to speak Spanish anymore. In fact, my great-grandparents forbid it because they wanted the family to be able to survive and thrive in a community that was not accepting of us once we left the comforts and the safety of the San Luis Valley at the time. So I think it is both. I think we are deeply rooted and deeply proud of our longstanding contributions and leadership and efforts to really build a community. And also, I think being ninth generation means that we have to fight and advocate for ourselves a little bit harder to say, no, we're still Latino. Right. Maybe I'm multiple generations removed from, being from Mexico or having those Spanish roots. But at the end of the day, I embrace my Latinidad. I say that we have to build a very large tent for those that are first generation immigrants to those that have been around for multiple generations that may not even speak Spanish anymore. I think the Latinidad tent has to be wide enough for all of us.
Yeah, and that we embrace the differences in our culture. That's what makes Latino unity very difficult, because we are so diverse. But on the other hand, I always say, if we can pull this off, if we can do it, we're the model for the multicultural generation that's coming, and we're the model for the multicultural age. I know you have French blood and I have French blood. And so we mix it up.
And Irish.
Yeah,
my grandmother was Irish.
And so here we are the prototype for the multicultural society. But at the same time, we come from such a rich culture, and our culture can contribute to, I think, healing America, bringing a sense, you're also a diversity and inclusion specialist. And so the whole idea of America's race consciousness that I think we need to get out of, because we're all the races. We come from so many places. Okay, so I want to come back a little bit to roots, because I know you come, and here was your grandmother who came over, or great-grandmother who came over by herself from Mexico. Tell us a little bit about your grandmother, Ramona Martinez, who I'm not going to spill the beans about who she is, but some of the strong women in your culture, because you have just taken off like a star in your lifetime. And I'm convinced it's because of the cradle of these women that prepared you.
Without a doubt. I mean, there is no question. And if I get emotional, it's only because of the pride and the gratitude that I have. I come from a long legacy of just extraordinary Latino women, and I think about that almost daily. I think about the lessons I learned from them, the examples that they set for me. So, really going back to my great-grandmothers, my grandma Louise really did have a hand in raising me. She had a third grade education, and yet really instilled in me the importance of being good in school and, doing my homework and really caring. And she also really taught me that family is number one, and that at the end of the day, I mean, she gave up a lot to take care of my dad and me and my brother and others in the family. My other great-grandmother, Mary, that I talked about, I mean, her house would fit in one side of my garage. It was this tiny house a couple blocks away from Lady of Guadalupe, which was her church and her community. I almost don't recognize that neighborhood anymore, but she didn't have anything. I mean, truly, honestly, for people would judge her and say, you have no money, you have no, you're not living the American dream. But she was the most generous person I knew. If she had 25 cents to her name, she would give it. So much so that sometimes we'd go and visit her, and she would have, random people living on her couch, and we would say, grandmother, this isn't safe. And yet she would cook, she would give them shelter, she would give them food. And so from my great grandmother, I really learned that you don't have to have an abundance of money and financial wealth in order to give. And
well, and I think the other thing that's so important is that you do it in different ways. When you nurture people in a leadership program, or you nurture people by mentoring them, or you know, by helping a young Latino with a scholarship, you're still doing what your grandmother did. Yeah. And that's how I feel about my life. I say my mother loved children and took care of children and did so much. And I'm just doing it at a different, you know, a bigger impact, but I'm doing the same thing my mother did.
Right,
and
because
those
they taught
values
the importance of it. Yeah, that's the
you.
thing, is that how we do it may have evolved, but why we do it hasn't. And it's rooted in the lessons that they taught us. And then when you get to my grandmothers, I mean, on the one end, an Irish strong grandmother who taught me resiliency, and you just fight, and you know, you're not given anything, but you're going to work towards it. And then my grandmother Ramona, who was the first Latina president of the city council. She was a teenage mom, a very young grandmother. People think she's my mom. She loves that to this day. But I remember, you know, when she wanted to run for Denver City Council.
Oh yeah, and you have to realize, you remember what date that was, because we're talking pioneer here.
Yeah, 1986. So
1986.
She ended up winning in 87. She was elected in 1987. You know, at a time when this was not the norm. I mean, Latinas just didn't run for office. They had different roles, but she got involved first in, like many Latinas, engaged in education of her children, and started getting involved in, you know, school matters and school board matters, and had a great mentor in Sam Sandos. And you know, her and my grandfather, part of that civil rights movement, and knowing that education and voting were mission critical to giving Latinos a voice, and to having them have power in their own destinies. And so I thought it was totally normal, by the way, Juana, that every family during family dinners would talk about voting rights and social justice and economic prosperity. So again, I benefited in my career. Really, I think I had an advantage, and probably a catalyst that most didn't, because I was just surrounded by Latinas and Latinos who knew the power of our community, recognizes the challenges that we continue to face, but this was the important element: worked really hard and believed that if you put in the effort, you could change outcomes. And so regardless if they were entrepreneurs, or they were running the Denver City Council, or like my mom, who would go on to be an executive in the financial industry, you work hard, you recognize that you give back to community. And I think that those values are what I gained from all of them in my life.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about your family is that your grandmother's in her 80s and she's still involved. You know, I want to take a little side here for the women that have children, because my 3 daughters were also involved in the community with me, and you were involved. And so one of the lessons is, you know, you say, oh, I'm busy, I can't do maybe a volunteer work, but take your children with you, because what you're doing is you're instilling in them these values. And this is why we've moved up. The Hispanic journey has been a collective journey of all of us helping each other, moving together, trying to work hard to do well. So a lot of these values that were passed on to you, I'm encouraging people to tell their stories at dinner, to get their children engaged, to let them know that they can make a contribution even at a young age. You know, my daughter Paloma, in her teens, used to volunteer at Mi Casa, and was part of they had a little theater group that would go around to schools to educate girls about not getting pregnant, etc. You know, and it just made her a leader. You know, and she's a professor now. And I think if we do that with our children, then we're preparing the next generation, and it's so important, since half of Latinos are under 18. So we got to get this party going.
No, I mean,
okay, so here you are. You're prepared for leadership. Tell me a little bit about your first career, and I'm going to say that your Latino Leadership Institute is your second, and how these two fit together. How were you prepared to make this incredible impact with the Latino Leadership Institute?
Well, first and foremost, no matter what I was going to do in my life, I knew it was going to be my objective in life is I want to change outcomes for our community. I fully believe in the potential of the Latino community. And for the first chapter, I really focused in on public service policy and really navigating how Latinos become powerful in politics.
Translate that for people.
Yeah, in politics. So I worked on campaigns. I got Latinos
political
to vote.
Campaigns.
I worked on political campaigns. I worked on public policy that would be good for the Latino community.
For example,
so the last big project that I worked on was actually the Affordable Care Act. And I was brought in as an outsider consultant to help navigate how we would actually pass the Affordable Care Act. And I actually had to work with insurance companies to get them on board and to navigate that. But Affordable Care Act was opening healthcare access to
folks, this is great. Here we have a Latina.
And I would say a high, particularly for Latinas, is I actually got to work on the campaign that brought our first Latina to the United States Supreme Court. And I want to share this a little bit because, she had all Sotomayor, and she had all the credentials. And I mean, there was no doubt she was a more than qualified candidate. But to be honest, pulling the curtains back a little bit, we had to run a campaign. Wise Latina is ultimately what we branded it as, to show her as a wise Latina. Again, we have to reframe the norms. So I got to work on efforts that really not only put Latinos in a position of power, but to really talk to the elected officials throughout the country about the value that we bring and the expertise that we had. So that was definitely, and the day that Sotomayor was sworn in, Polly Baca, another amazing Latina leader, and I hosted the community. And at that time, Justice Sotomayor actually called into Denver, of all places, and just shared the excitement of the day with us. And so again, my work before the Institute was really about promoting Latino candidates for office, getting Latinos to vote, and building good policy that would help our community.
Wow, that is so fabulous. I love the way we've gone from your humble third grade great-grandmother all the way up to helping a Latina get on the Supreme Court. That's what I want our Latinas to get, that we're on the move now, that we can take it to the next level, and that we need to do that. We need to be more visible. We need to leverage our numbers and our economic power. Well, I'm just thrilled. So here you are. I know this story about how you got to the Latino Institute, but tell folks, because it's so inspiring, what happened.
A combination of things. First, I became a mom in 2009 to twins.
And how old are your children? They're twins, right?
They're teenagers now. So they're starting high school, which is,
I can't believe that.
I'm trying to wrap my mind around that, but that changes things as a professional. Before I had twins, I was, out to DC, and I had offices in 6 states across the country, and I could get on an airplane and I didn't have to necessarily be home. And I had a great, very supportive husband at home, but having twins changed things. And I knew that I really wanted to be present with my children. And so when Barack Obama was elected and then going into re-election, I was asked, do you want to come? Can you come and work on the campaign? Can you come to Chicago? And I made a really hard professional decision at that moment to say, no, I'm going to be home with my kids. So I actually took 3 years off. I
want to stop here because I kind of did a similar thing, but what I did was I stayed home for the first 3 years, but then I worked part-time till they were 10. Now, if you ask my children, they're going to say, oh no, she worked all the time. Right. And what I want to say to the women that are listening, it's okay to take that time for your children.
You'll never regret it.
To manage your career in a way, because you were still doing things, but you said, no, I don't want to be on planes. I don't want to travel that much when I have 2 small children. And I think that's a great lesson for the women listening, that as women, we want to balance that. So, okay. So what did you do instead?
So this was great in my life and my career, because obviously I couldn't do all the political campaign work I was doing. So I got to do a little bit more consulting on the private sector, which opened my portfolio. I realized that a lot of the skills that I had learned on the political side translated to the corporate. So I began to take on clients that allowed me to consult. And I grew and I learned new things. But at the end of the day, what really was the catalyst for me in making a career change is that fast forward to 2012, President Obama gets reelected. And I wanted to thank my husband. He had been this really supportive guy behind the scenes, allowing me to have this amazing career. And I had never taken him to Washington, D.C. with me.
Oh, okay. So another life lesson, pick a good partner.
I mean, right? I mean, Justice Ginsburg said
Yeah,
that, right?
I think
have
that's so
equality in the
beautiful.
boardroom until you have it at home. And that is very true, especially for career women. And so I took him to Washington, D.C. for all the holiday parties. And we left our young twins behind with my family, which was a tough decision to do, both of us leaving at the same time. And we were actually at the White House the day of the Sandy Hook massacre. We were in the White House. Everyone outside of the White House probably knew more than we did as to what was going on. And long story short, that as the day went by, I learned that the president was in the Situation Room he was late to come out to the festivities. That day, the president cried, the first lady spoke and really shared about what happened. But what changed my trajectory is that I've always been purpose-filled, but I have to drive outcomes. And in those conversations in the White House that day, people were talking, can we do gun reform and other things? And someone said, no, we're not even now can we do that. And I looked at my husband, and I think you have those inflection points in your life and your career, your North Star shifts a little bit. And I said, I'm ready to go home. And I meant that I wanted to talk to my kids, and the tragedy of the day had overcome, it had been so overwhelming, but also policy had changed. DC had changed. I mean, this was before the era that we're living in now. Bipartisanship, working to solve big problems together, having a moral compass as our guider in policy. All of that had begun to shift, and Washington D.C. wasn't where I was going to make an impact anymore. And I knew that I wanted to come home to Colorado. And at the end of the day, the aha moment that I had is that until we can change who the leaders are and change the face of leadership, the trickle down of good policy and good efforts, we're still out of reach for far too many. Mm-hmm. So the founders of the Latino Leadership Institute, good friends, Federico Pena, Cindy Pena, Tim Marquez, and others.
Federico Pena was the only Hispanic mayor of Denver in the 1990s. And he
still
helped
only
our
to this
airport,
day.
for those of you that fly in and out of Denver, and the convention center and the Rockies. And anyway, we're very proud that he was our mayor.
A visionary.
So he calls you up along with
he calls you up and
Latinos.
he says, I got this idea, you want to come to have lunch, and I got to give Cindy Pena, his wife, also a leader in so many ways, a lot of credit. And they had already had conversations about building an institute to support and elevate Latinos across sectors. And they bring me to lunch and they tell me this great idea that they have. And I said, okay, how can I help you? And I was stunned when they said, we want you to lead it. And Juana, this is the other really important lesson for Latina leaders. I did what so many Latinas do. And I said, okay, thanks, but no thanks. And I walked across the street to my grandparents' house, condo, and I had 27 reasons by the time I entered their condo as to why I wasn't qualified to do this job and why I wasn't good enough. And I sat before my grandfather and I told him about this vision of building an institute for Latino leaders. I told him that they wanted me to do it. And I told him that I knew I wasn't qualified, ready, prepared. And my grandfather is another important element in my success. You got to have people in your corner that are going to call you out on all your nonsense.
Right. Well, because actually fear of stepping up to leadership, or fear of going to a next level, or fear of getting a promotion. When you study male psychology, that does not stop them.
No.
And so women really have to say, of course, and fear and anxiety and excitement is actually
perfectionism. Mine is perfectionism. Like, I think I have to.
And perfectionism is another thing women do. We have to do it over and over and over again. Yeah. Whereas, and I remember working with some corporate leaders, and I would be sweating stuff, and they'd go like, "It's good enough."
It's good enough.
And that had never been part of my vocabulary. It's good enough. It was always, we can do better.
Yeah, no, or yes. And so I told my grandfather about this vision. I told him that they wanted me, and I told him that I wasn't ready. And my grandfather said, "Oh, you're doing it. And it's your turn to lead. And, you know, we've built a good
He said,
legacy,
it's your
but this
turn
is
to
your
lead,
time."
you're doing
He
it.
did. He said, and he told me something really important. He said, he was battling cancer. And it was a rare moment that I got alone time with him. And he said, you know, when you're at your final stages of life and everyone wants to come blow smoke up your, you know what, you know, my grandfather, so you know what he said.
Yeah. He was a union man, by the way.
He's a union man,
Got
and
no corners.
no, yeah. And he said, you know, everyone wants to tell you all the great things you did. And the only thing that your mind is thinking about are all the things you were too afraid to do. So you need to do this, Mija. And that was one of my final conversations with him. He passed a few days later. So not only is the LLI celebrating 10 years of this work, 10 years of since that conversation, but it's been 10 years since we lost him. But he told me, you have to have people in your corner that see your potential, that believe in you, that will catch you if you fall, because you may not succeed in all things, but they're going to have your back. And my success is both on the models of people who taught me a lot, and all the support from my grandfather, my dad, my husband, the men in my life who would never hold me back and did everything to push me forward. And so that is why I called up Cindy and Federico, because my grandfather told me I was going to do it, and I believed him. And the rest, as they say, is history. I took the job 10 years ago, and we built a national institute. Let me stop you for 1 minute,
because I think there's so many leadership lessons here as well. And that, you know, in some ways, because I am an immigrant, and the sad thing about immigration is you don't have this 9 generation, you don't have that sense of community. So I want to encourage the women that are listening to really spend some time thinking about building that community around you. I'm fortunate now because I've been in Denver for so long that I have my community that supports me. But leaders never make it alone. It's always your support. And sometimes we're so busy, we forget about that. But that's what's going to hold your feet to the fire. That's what's going to encourage you. That's, you know, real people see your potential even more than you do. I do want to say one little thing, by the way, Joelle, because I had the same aha about leadership that you do. And I want to also encourage every woman who's here. We're going to talk about the Leadership Institute and how important leadership training is. But if you haven't been in a program or you want to polish your leadership skills, it's really important. And so I was sitting at Mi Casa Women's Center, the resource center, for 10 years, and I realized I could be there for the rest of my life. And by the way, it's going to celebrate 50 years in 2 years. And that the thing that would change things, because women were going to be coming in to learn Spanish, to get jobs, to get their GEDs, for counseling, kids were going to come, young girls, to stay in school and finish high school, is leadership. And that's when I left Mi Casa, and it was a similar thing, except I got a call from the Adolf Coors Company asking me to launch the National Hispanic Leadership Institute. And so the other lesson, I think, which is so important, is that if you put your life to purpose, like you have, the opportunities do come. You know, I say the universe is just waiting for us to say yes.
Yeah. And saying yes, I mean,
you think said all yes.
I said yes.
Yeah. So tell us about your 10 years with the Latino Leadership Institute, paying special attention to what are some gifts and tools that some of our listeners can pick up as well.
Yeah. Well, I do believe in the power and the potential of the Latino community. And the reason that the Latino Leadership Institute for 10 years, I think, has had such an impact is that our mission and our purpose are unapologetic. We are here to support, advance the Latino community. A couple important statistics, you know, everyone listening already knows, but it's important to remind, is that Latinos are the second largest, fastest growing demographic in the country, responsible for $3.4 trillion in annual GDP. And we are representing 75% of all workforce replacement in the United States today. In other words, the future of America, I call this the Latino century, because what's actually happening is that we're coming into that space where the economy, the workforce, our school systems really does rely, the vitality of all of those rely on us being successful and us being contributors. And so that is true. What is also true is that in 2022, Latinos face the largest wealth gap. We are nearly invisible in executive positions at only 4%. And when it comes to building wealth through small business or other efforts, Latinos are still very, very basically scratching the surface for our full potential. So the LLI sits in a space to say, we are going to go about unlocking that Latino potential, building wealth, building power, building influence, and stepping into executive leadership roles. And in order to do that, we have to do two things. We have to prepare and train and support these individuals who are going into leadership roles across sectors and building businesses. And we have to convince organizations, maybe even society as a whole, that we are primed for those positions. So the LLI puts together national programming called Ignite, which is our Latino leadership programming. It's sector agnostic, which means you could be a nonprofit executive leader, up and coming leader, or you could sit in corporate America or elected officials. It doesn't matter, but you step into cohorts with peoples and peers with very different backgrounds, 1st gen to 10th gen, Spanish speaking to non-Spanish speaking, different education levels, but everyone motivated to step into their power. We teach them, we start with the roots of our identity, because we think that that's actually our superpower. And you would be surprised to find out how many Latinos have never explored that in a professional setting. They may feel good about their identity when they're home with their family or community, but they have often code switched or changed how they show up at work. And we actually think that Latinidad is a superpower. Then we work through issues that we face. And I push back a lot on imposter syndrome. Latinos are just, we face imposterization.
Right.
So microaggressions. And so we show up, we have fear, we have lack of confidence because we get paid less for our work. So how can I be confident that I'm contributing if I'm not getting paid? And so we work through some of that. And then a basis of all of our training is in the neuroscience and neuro leadership.
Oh, I really wanted to talk to you about that, because that's one of the areas that you really have studied and teach, the neuroscience.
Yeah. So we're not just training Latino leaders, we're training leaders for the 21st century. And neuroscience and neuro leadership, I think, is so perfect for Latinos in particular, because it's based on the fact that we operate based on emotion. We are wired to act certain ways. And how do we go about actually leveraging some of that so that we could be more productive, more collaborative, more innovative? And that's what 21st century leadership is going to require. So the neuro leadership components that we bring to the program teach people how to leverage the way we are wired in order to be more productive.
So give me an example of that.
So first example is that we actually have 3 brains. Most people just think of the brain that sits in but the human body. So think about decision making as executives, as leaders. And what happens biologically in our body anytime we're confronted with the decision is that we go through a 3-brain system. It starts here, but our second brain is actually our heart, corazón. And so when we have to make a decision, especially a painful decision, maybe letting someone go, maybe a reorg that's going to affect changing jobs, making it, you feel it here. You feel that pressure here. And then actually our third brain sits in our guts. And people don't know that we have something called the vagus nerve that goes directly from our brain to our guts. And that we have this same neurobiology in our guts and neurons as we do in our brain. And so when we talk about gut instinct, when we talk about intuition, which is something a lot of Latino leaders have naturally, intuitive thinking, we make these decisions oftentimes in our gut and our instincts. So we teach, I mean, and how perfect is we think about integration and some things that are actually based in our culture. But now we have the neuroscience to back up. How do we leverage all three brains in order to make the best decisions possible and to teach them how to listen to all three things to make the best decision? So that's in module 3. And I will tell you, I get more requests after people complete the program. They want more and more because now they're tying the things that their abuelitas used to tell them. And now they're seeing it being backed by the neuroscience. And then they go out and actually become very effective decision makers, because we just taught them how people actually process the decisions.
Wow, that's fabulous. Yeah, you know, the heart has as many neutrons, it has more neutrons than the brain. And so Latinos really can start tapping into their, you know, I always say hágalo con ganas means that we're going to put our passion into what we do, which is our heart, our ability to do things.
And it used to be that, you know, the word passionate or Latinos being kind of stereotyped as being, you know, wearing their heart on their sleeves or being overly passionate or overly emotional or sensitive. I push back and I'm like, that's actually our superpower. We make better decisions when we are in executive leadership, when we can be in tune with all of that. And that's good. That's actually a good quality.
Well, and that's actually also taking into account the people around you. Because a lot of times you can make a good decision, but if it has negative impacts on the people around you, it's not going to work. And part of that is listening to people and what they have to say about it, because they're going to feel it as well. You know, they're going to know as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So well, you know, I call it the Latino advantage, that because, you know, all of us had to, and many of the people listening, we've been to dominant culture universities. We know the system. Yes, we need to learn the rules of power and how organizations operate and so forth. But we really are bilingual, bicultural, and we're adding value. It's the Latino advantage. Here we come. We're integrated as far as our brains, our minds. Actually, I would say our bodies too, because your body also has memory. And so trying to bring that back to the table and recognizing the fact that now that we know the Anglo system, and by the way, I always say that finally, when I went to college, people have heard this, I was the only Latina back in 1960. But now we have an intellectual class, and that's what's going to make this shift. That's what's going to make this transformation, because not only do we have an intellectual class, but we have people studying leadership, beginning to make their mark, beginning to say, I'm ready to move up, having generations of people like my mother with her 5th grade education preparing me. So we're representing generations of people who have said, like your grandfather said, oh, you're going to do this, you're ready. And that's a great message for our women to get today. We're ready. And yes, it's fearful. And yes, we may not know certain things, but we can learn that. And we have to remember we're bringing an advantage. We're bringing our superpower, which is Latinos. And by the way, with the statistics you gave, everybody needs to know about Latinos, because you're going to be working with, marrying, next door neighbor. They're going to be your boss. I mean, you know, we've got to integrate the Latinidad into our culture today. That's the job of the next generation. Well, you've had such an incredible career. One thing I wanted to talk about, though, is I know you have an entrepreneurial program, which is a little bit different than leadership. And I wanted to cap it with that before we talk about maybe some of the challenges you've had and some of the things that are going on in your life today. So tell us about that entrepreneurial, because that's a very innovative program you all started.
Yeah, so we have a program called LEAP in addition to Ignite, which really focuses in on all of the things we think we need in our toolbox to become better, more effective leaders in our work and in our communities. LEAP was really born out of the fellowship, our initial program, and that is because entrepreneurship, I think, is a necessity. A lot of Latinos, particularly immigrants who come to the United States, become entrepreneurs. You know, sometimes your college degree from a different country does not translate to the United States. You could have a medical degree, you come to the United States, you can't be a doctor.
Don't get me started with that,
So-
because if you're European, they count it. And if you're from South America, they don't. It's just another level of prejudice.
So, and I think entrepreneurship, that we have this entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial spirit, but so we always put entrepreneurship into, it's a mindset. It truly is. And whether you are running a nonprofit, you should still be entrepreneurial, or whether you are, you know, looking at building wealth. And so you have a product you want to sell, you're entrepreneurial. And that is very much rooted in our community. And so we always had entrepreneurship as part of our work. A couple of years ago, we decided to double down though. And some of this motivation is that until we build wealth in our community, it's going to be hard for us to really be empowered as a community and have that influence and power. And one of the three ways you build wealth is through small business and entrepreneurship ownership. And what
the other
would
two ways are property, right?
Home ownership and then inheritance and investments. Well, we can't get to that either one of those until we have a down payment to get to a
That's
house.
a good one, inheritance.
Inheritance. Well, and that, you know, that's my goal. That's my goal, is to get to the point where we're talking about inheritance. But what would keep me up at night was what would get me going in the morning with entrepreneurship. And that is that statistically, Latinos, and particularly Latinas, are opening businesses much faster than the rest of the population. And that when we looked at the last recession and coming out of that last recession, it was Latino-owned businesses that spurred a lot of the local economic recovery and sustainable growth over time. So Latino businesses are mission critical for the economy as a whole. However, less than 3% of Latino businesses ever make it to $1 million in annual revenue. Most
What
Latino
percent did you say? Only
3%
make it to $1 million in revenue.
And annually, and most of our Latino-owned businesses are sole proprietorships, meaning that it's them. And you and I both know, because we've run businesses, we've run organizations, that if that is the case, then we're not actually building wealth. We're barely keeping the lights on and the doors open. And so I decided to say, and there are great programs like Mi Casa and other programs that are there to really help Latinos start a business,
right,
to begin to do all of the things to build a business. Where LEAP comes in is really growth stage. So businesses that have been around a couple years, businesses that have, you know, shown some success. But what we want to do is we want to take them to that next level. We want to take them beyond $1 million in annual revenue. So what we do at the LLI is that, one, they have a series of courses, but most importantly, I want to amplify something you said earlier: networks and social capital. What we don't have as Latinos is the country club, where we can call our friends to serve on our boards, to help us raise the investment capital, to tell us about this person. So what LLI did is we took a global group of advisors, past Latino entrepreneurs and founders, subject matter expertise. And for every entrepreneur that goes through our program, we actually sit an advisory board for them of these other successful Latinos, in essence, like creating a country club around their businesses. So teaching them about financials, introducing them to potential lenders or investors, helping them think through their business planning, but with the Latino lens and the Latino journey in mind. And I can tell you that already we've seen businesses multiply.
Yeah, give us an example of one of the businesses and what happened.
Yeah, so a great example in cohort one, Roberto Meses, he owns Emerald Greens and food. So he's kind of a unique social enterprise that he owns farms and microgreens and things that keep us healthy. And part of that, he also does a food hub because he knows that Latinos don't have access to good, healthy food. And so he had an advisor in Argentina. I'm not exaggerating. One of his advisors was in Argentina. Less than a couple of weeks ago, he flew to Denver, and Roberto was up for a major investment, a 7-figure investment into his company. And his advisor flew and actually sat with him and prepared him and did an analysis and has been coaching him on decision making around this investment and what it would mean for the business. And so, you know, and Roberto's business is just taking off. I mean, he's looking at buying another facility, not leasing, but buying another a grow facility for his microgreens.
So let me ask you this, is this program open nationwide?
It will be. So right now it's Colorado based, but LLI is working right now on a building a national platform, which will allow entrepreneurs and leaders to get mentors, advisors, and content. You know, that's no longer geographically limited. So
Great.
really
So
excited
stay
about
tuned.
it.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
That's a great thing. Yeah, economic wealth is so important, and our community is at that threshold where we can make that next level. And then the other thing I think is so important, you talked about starting with Latino identity, and all the leadership programs we go through our history, our culture, our identity, because that's what we don't want to lose. You know, yeah, we want to do well, but so others can do well so that we can move forward. I was going to say that in my work, I teach folks that innovation and creativity and doing more with less and resourcefulness is part of the Latino DNA. That's how we made it to where we are. And that whether you're in a job or whether you have a small business or whether you're a teacher, you can use that. I call it the Si Se Puede spirit. You can use that sense of innovation, that sense of small business know-how that we have. You know, my immigrant mother, when she finished washing dishes for 10 years, we built a little room onto the house and she started a little daycare and became a little businesswoman, ended up taking that money and buying a piece of property. I mean, we are so resourceful, so innovative, even when we're not educated, because that's how we got here. And so, but we don't know how to go to the next level. And that's the threshold that we need to pass today. And we're so excited to have, you know, someone like you at the helm of that, because so many of our businesses are small and they don't make it to that next level.
Exactly. That's it. We're motivated by the potential of this community, and we see our roots, we see our values, we see our hard work as all being assets and tools in the toolbox. I believe that the game changer for our community will come down to social capital. I think it is going to be, I think for a long time we were siloed, we weren't given, you know, the intel, we didn't have necessarily the person or the people tapping us on their back and giving us.
We didn't have the language or the fiscal abilities. We didn't know budgets. We didn't know strategic planning. We didn't know.
No one ever told us
power language. I mean, there's so many things.
No one ever told us, you know, that you need a good P&L to do X, Y, and Z. So at the end of the day, for me, the potential was already there. The hard work was already there. The values was always there. Where LLI really sees itself on a national level. By the way, our second office is in Puerto Rico, and I don't think people know that. We're here in Denver, but our second office is in Puerto Rico. And I bring that up because the other thing that the LLI believes is that we are so vast. And the diaspora of the Latinidad, that once we can tap into that, I do believe we're going to step into our own power. I do. But part of our thesis is that all we have to do is build social capital around these other elements that we already bring to the table, and support and mentor and advocate for and give our expertise to. I don't think we have to go outside to solve a lot of problems, to build a lot of businesses. I think if we can bring the wealth of expertise together. So I mentioned this, but our next chapter is going to be leveraging AI and building a platform and technology so that individuals can really get the support, you know, through content, but through people connections in a meaningful way to help them grow in their careers and businesses, ultimately closing this wealth gap. So I believe that people in my life made my career, my journey, my success possible. And if we can build that around other people, I know the sky's the limit.
Well, and I'm hoping that even this series that we're doing gets Latinas to start thinking, how can we connect? How can we, you know, because we're going to put your contact information up. Let's try to really build this network of
Absolutely.
Latinos ready to move forward, but
That's
also
it.
ready to unify and to
Yes,
bring our community forward together.
absolutely.
Well, before we end, tell us about a challenge you overcame, because I have to tell you, your life seems very rosy to me.
No,
You have
I,
this great ancestry, you have this great husband.
no,
What's a
not at all.
challenge that you feel like you really overcame to give our women a sense of that, and how'd you do it so they can learn from you?
Well, I built programming based on my own lived experiences. So talking about roots of identity is because I suffered a long time really understanding who I was and what that meant. You live between two worlds when you're a Latino in the Southwest and in many places in the country. And I code switched for a really long time, and I was never enough in the Latino community, and I was never enough in my, the white, schooling community that I went to. And so
Well, I found I could be enough there, but I wasn't comfortable.
yeah, maybe that's right. Maybe,
I mean, I could
maybe
do
that's
it, but I
true.
mean, I kept, but there was
I
something
did,
wrong. There
I
was
did.
something missing, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think that it was a struggle to
Yes.
really understand how I could be both. The way that I teach it is I am 200%. I'm 100% Latino, and I'm also 100% American, and
Yeah.
have
When
and
somebody tells me
benefited from it.
that they're half Latino, I say, which half?
Which have no, and I
It's
don't.
not.
I'm
You're
just
all
200%.
Latino and you're
Like,
all Anglo and you're all, I mean, you know what I mean?
yeah,
It's,
no,
it's,
and
it's
so
part of our job to integrate all of these differences. And the thing about integration is every time you do it, you go to a higher level.
you go to higher, and
There is
you
no
allow it.
downside. You go to a
No,
higher
no,
level.
that's why I'd rather be 200% than half of anything. And so that has been my experience. I talked a little bit about imposterization. It's real. I'm a perfectionist. This is something I still struggle with today. And, some of that I learned, you got to work really hard. You got to
Right.
be the top, and, because people are going to try to pull you down. Well, that manifested into this, and so I'm a work in progress. And so, I think that's something that is actually in the Ignite program as well. And I think the other thing that I have really, over the course of my life, struggled with is taking care of myself. And there have been times, and I've been very transparent, especially in the programs and in talking to the Latino Leadership Institute network, that I've made myself sick. Literally, I think at one point I was down to like 87 pounds because I was working myself so much.
Right.
I've neglected myself over the years, and that's caused health issues. And the one thing that I think is really important is you're no good to yourself or your family or your community or your company that you're running if you run yourself down.
Right.
So asking for help, taking time out, resting, nurturing your soul and your mind. I read a book a day, and I try to maintain that so that I'm nurturing kind of my curiosity. But that is a real struggle. And part of this, especially for Latinas, we've got to succeed in the workplace. We're now the breadwinners in our family. We're now the ones who are getting more college degrees statistically. We're making more money. We have responsibilities at work, but our responsibilities at home as mothers, as daughters, as sisters, as wives have not changed. So we have a lot of pressure put on us. And there was just some recent research. I just wrote an article on this that you can find on our website. But I think for Latinas in particular, we have to do a better job of taking care of ourselves. And so that's actually module 4 of our program, is that while I want you to take new leadership roles, I want you to do it in a smart, thought, and strategic way. And I don't believe you can have it all at the same time. I think it's about choices. I think it is about prioritization and good planning and good support systems. But oftentimes we're not taught those things. And so those are some things that we are teaching at the LLI.
Well, one thing I can offer as an elder, which I was actually going to say, you can't do it all at the same time.
No.
And that is to have some perspective. If
Yes.
I know that your work and my work, and most Latino leaders, it's a lifelong commitment. And we're not going anywhere because this is our community. I mean, look at the two of us. There's so many years between us, but our paths are very similar. And so people are following you just like you're following the others, So it's like a relay race. We're passing the torch of leadership.
Oh, I love that. That's a great, yeah, Yeah.
So you overcame those challenges. Well, I'm glad because you're looking fabulous now. So this is all about Hispanic Heritage Month. Talk to me a little bit about what is it about our heritage, about this moment in history? Let's give these Latina women that are listening and these people that are with us just this whole idea about here comes the Latino wave.
Yeah, I love it. The Latino century. So what does that mean? I think it's everything we've talked about. It's about people. I mean, we are a people community. It is about multi-generation. We respect the past as much as we look forward to the future, and we honor the moment that we're in. I think these are all very unique things. Food, music, you talked about that. My walk-up song for when I give my keynotes in my podcast, my kids, I chose it because it talks about music and dance is the thing that, no matter where you are or what, whether you're South American or, a Latino living in Australia, there's something about hearing a beat, a note. There's something beautiful about celebration, about being together. And
like
and
my
those are the
leadership
things.
Classes, when they're over, everybody's on the dance floor.
Dance floor. I love this. I think it is.
And
it
nobody
is
cares what you look like. We're just all
Nobody
out there.
cares. For me, it is about embracing those things that bring us such joy and pride. And I will say this. I think we're at a tough moment in history, and there's a lot of things that we are going to face and challenges and headwinds, and they might get a lot worse before they get better. But finding happiness and joy is so important, or finding your moments of peace and tranquility is equally important, but joy matters a lot. And what brings joy in large part to the Latino community is just togetherness. It's people. It's whether it's food or music or a movie or something, or just being together. We celebrate the good moments, the bad moments, and everything in between. So during Hispanic Heritage Month, which, by the way, I have a love-hate relationship with, because I want 12 months out of the year to celebrate
That's
our love.
how I always
culture.
say. I say Hispanic Heritage, not just a month.
It's let's call it the Hispanic Heritage Century that we're celebrating and being a part of it. But I do think it is a moment to find joy, and especially this Hispanic Heritage Month, when we might be facing more challenges and headwinds than ever before. Finding joy in people and in others in the community is mission critical for all of us. And so that's what it is. It is the frijoles and the green chili, and in the Southwest, there's big battles about green chili, red chili, corn tortilla, flour tortilla. I say bring it all, but I think it's all of that we have to amplify and celebrate. And the final thing I'll say too, for Latinas listening, is celebrating who we are and being seen with our bold colors, our red lipstick, our big earrings. For the longest time, we couldn't come into the professional space.
I used to wear a blue pinstripe shirt.
I had a brown suit.
I had a blue pinstripe suit.
I remember when I was working, and I was told that by mentors, you need to, you needed to do that. You need to look the part.
I always laugh because I was going to go get some money, and I had on this blue pinstripe suit, and I had my hair back, and I passed somebody on the street that didn't recognize me. Because you got to do what you got to do,
And that was the case. But I think in this moment, particularly for Latinas, being seen for who we are is actually, the younger generation will benefit from kind of what we had to go through during the assimilation. But celebrate whatever that identity is, celebrate that. Wear the red lipstick, if that's how you are reflected, and that's how you see yourself. And don't ever let someone tell you that you got to change the way you do things to make others feel more comfortable. I think we got to find the ways to make ourselves feel more comfortable in these spaces. And that's the other thing I want to celebrate this Hispanic Heritage Month. Like, wear the red lipstick with pride.
Well, and I think, I'd like to end with quoting J-Lo, this is me now.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah.
This is who I am.
If you would have seen me 20 years ago in my career, you would not have recognized me.
Right?
Yeah.
And celebrate who you are. And I think the younger generation has a real thing about being yourself.
I love it. I'm jealous. I'm
Yes.
actually
And
jealous
knowing
that
who
they
you
have
are.
that.
And this as an
Oh,
intergenerational thing, we want to let you know that we totally support that.
I
And that
do.
we're looking at intersectionality, and human beings use
Yes.
such a small part of their brain. We have
I
so
know.
much potential. And
Yeah.
and just remember this Hispanic Heritage Month, that Latinos are here to transform America. Latinos are
Absolutely.
here to bring real family values into our country, and to live them, and to take care of each other, and to look at humanistic values that come out of our people. So
Yeah.
this is a great time in history. I always like to say el futuro es Latino or Latina, because we know the first Latina president has been born.
I
and
agree.
so this is our time. This is our
Yeah.
century. I want to thank you so much for the work you're doing in uplifting Latinos, especially young Latinos, and getting us not only economic power, but social power and political power. And as we move up, to take the beauty of our culture, our heritage, and our ancestry with us. So gracias from the bottom of my heart. And I just can't wait for people to get on your website and see all the wonderful things you're doing with the Latino Leadership Institute. And stay tuned, because it's going nationwide.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Juana, and thank you for your many years of service and mentorship and inspiration. I would not be here if I did not have the Juanas in my life.
Yeah, and I would not be here if I didn't have the inspiration of people like you coming for the next generation, because all that we've done has been so we could be at this moment. Bueno, gracias, mi gente. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month.